Welcome back. For those who were here yesterday, for those who weren't here yesterday, welcome to the 6th Feagin Leadership Forum. Each year it keeps getting better, and this year is no different. And it's nice to see a packed room on Saturday morning. We've got a very special morning for all of you, for everybody this morning. You will see in your program that we have some great speakers and we have some special things that we have that we're going to do throughout the morning. We're not going to waste time introducing people and giving you their past history. That's in those bios. Okay? So everybody should have a packet of the bio sketches of all our speakers. But I do want to say a little bit about each of our speakers. We're going to have one of our keynotes by Major General Kenny Dahl. And Kenny and I have known each other for a long time. And he and his classmates, the class of '82 from West Point, have had a little mini reunion here. And it's been fun to see you guys interacting. And it's been fun to see Kenny in his new role as a Major General in the Army, because we go back to cadet days. And as a lacrosse player and a hockey player, no one would ever have thought that we would have even graduated. So it's nice to see guys like Kenny succeed and really do well. So Kenny and one of our other speakers, who's there in the back, Jay Billis, are new to the forum. So Jay and Wendy, welcome. And Jay and I go way back too to the late '80s. When Jay was a graduate assistant coach and I was a resident under Frank Bassett and had the opportunity to travel with the basketball team. And we would room together. Jay, just like General Dahl, you've come a long way. So we're glad that you guys are here as newcomers. And we also have some constants for the forum. And one of those constants is that we always have the scholars teams present. And for those of you who were here yesterday, you saw two of the teams give their presentations. And for me, that's the highlight of the entire forum. And today, you'll be lucky enough to hear one of the other teams present their team projects after General Dahl speaks. The other constant of the forum has been Mike Krzyzewski. And Coach K has been here and has spoke at every forum since 2009. And we're so grateful for that. It really provides a foundation for what we do. And really, he and John Feagin are inspirations to all of us as we all try to become better leaders. And for those of us in medicine, I think John embodies a lot of things of what Coach does in athletics and otherwise, and what he does for Duke University. So that's what we're here for. We're here to learn from each other about how we can be better leaders. And Coach K certainly has contributed to that. My fellows know I always say timing is everything. And so our timing with Coach has been pretty good. 2 national championships over the course of 6 years of the forum. And in 2010, our theme was about how do you, as a leader, put together good teams, great teams. So after they won the national championship, he was able to relate some stories about that team, and that was an incredible team that came together. What I've always called Together's team, because that was a group that came together and did what they did because collectively they were a team. This year, we're talking about distributive leadership or shared leadership. And Coach has some great stories from this year's team as well. And certainly Grayson Allen embodies what you can do if you have a shared or distributive leadership approach to things. So I'm looking forward to the comments of Jay and Coach today as one of the constants. We also have had some constants in that this leadership forum represents the contributions of a lot of people, certainly all of you, as well as a lot of people that support us from the School of Medicine and the health system, providing us a great venue like this to hold the forum. DHI and the Leadership and Workforce Development arm of DHI supporting what Joe Doty and I do for leadership across the health system and the School of Medicine. But also there are individual contributors and our corporate sponsors. So I really want to recognize our corporate sponsors, and so hold your applause to the end because we have quite a few. And I want to just name specifically DePuy Synthes MyTech, and led by Matt Jewett and Lisa D'Onofrio, who are here. DJO, Dan Barish, Smith & Nephew, John Mahoney. Arthrex and South Tech is led, the contingency is led by Houston Bagley here. ACO Med Supply, Stu Ross. Bragg with Steve Ort, and Histogenics led by Adam Gridley. So round of applause for all our sponsors. Thank you. And I don't call them sponsors. Actually, they're our partners in what we do. And we really work together with them to, again, learn from each other on leadership. Before we get going, we do have a special announcement, and this is something that is near and dear to my heart. So I'd like to take this time to recognize somebody that's been very important to the Feagin program. So if I could have my wife, Ann Taylor, General Maureen LaBeouf, Joe Doty, John Feagin, and Rob Feagin, please come up here and join me for a second. Yesterday we announced that we have 5 departments here that are going to have named leadership scholars. And we also have a Piedmont Leadership Scholar. And a lot of this came from an idea that we thought it would be good to have named scholars. And John and Rob and I were in discussions about what we could do to really honor somebody that's contributed a tremendous amount to our program, and that's our former executive director, General Maureen LaBeouf. And just so you know, those who don't know General LaBeouf, she was the first academic department head at West Point who was a woman. And not only that, it was the Department of Physical Education. Pretty tall task, and with that, agreed. With that job comes the title of Master of the Sword. So don't mess with the Master of the Sword, all right? Don't mess with the Master of the Sword. But when we were still getting organized and still building this program about 4 years ago, I really needed some help. But Jane Boswick-Caffrey, where's Jane? Jane had really done a great job, but Jane went off to South Africa. And I needed an executive director to really help us. And I asked Maureen, because we'd been friends at West Point, and I knew she was in the area. And Maureen took on a job not realizing what she was getting herself into. And from a general who has a staff of hundreds to working with me and my secretary, it was a big leap. And from stuffing envelopes to planning our curriculum and really moving the program forward and loving all the scholars and really mentoring and coaching all the scholars for those years. Maureen contributed in ways that people will never know, but I know, and Ann knows, and John knows, and near and dear to our heart, we want to recognize those contributions. So John and I and his family have decided that we are going to contribute each year to sponsor a scholar in Maureen's honor. So, Ann, if you'd like to give that to Maureen. Maureen, if you could open that while I keep going on. And what we're going to do is we're going to have our selection committee select each year one of the third-year medical students to be a Feagin Leadership Scholar, but we're going to have them select a third-year female medical student who we think embodies the leadership qualities that Maureen embodies: commitment to excellence, integrity, selfless service, critical thinking, teamwork, patient-centeredness, all those things that are in our model, and all those things that Maureen embodies. And that scholar will be easily recognizable because they'll have a pin, just like this one that Anne, and I have to take a minute. I have to recognize that we tasked Ann Taylor with coming up with how we were going to select, how we were going to recognize Maureen with the Master of the Sword Leadership Scholar. And Ann was able to design a pin that scholar will wear throughout the year. So the Master of the Sword Leadership Scholar will have this pin, and we're so proud to present you with that today, and so grateful for all that you've done. Do you want to say anything?
So Dean said I have 45 minutes. Thank you for that. So this is, first of all, I showed up and there's my name badge and it says VIP. So I'm going to show my kids that. It took me 61 years. Finally, I'm a VIP. I want to thank Dean and Ann and John and Rob, and I have to acknowledge Jane, who went before me. You can't build something well unless there's a strong foundation, and Jane started and built that strong foundation. So I thank you for that. I loved being the executive director because of the scholars, and several of them are here today. And as I always said, the scholars truly touch my heart, and I believe the scholars are truly going to make a difference in the world of medicine as leaders. And I think we all know, and while I'm a doctor, but I'm not that kind of a doctor, we need strong leadership in medicine. And so I look forward to seeing how our scholars move forward and make a difference in our world, in medicine, and in their communities. And I will just say in closing, I am incredibly humbled by this honor, and I look forward to working with the scholar who is the Master of the Sword Scholar. Thank you again.
Joe, you got big shoes to fill, as you know. So our executive director now, Joe Doty, is going to be introduced by somebody else because I'm going to introduce Leah first. And Joe's raring to get going because he knows we got a great day in store for you. But again, for those of you who were here yesterday, you know what Leah Hood does for this forum and for our program. She pulls it all together. And Leah volunteers her time to do that. Leah has a full-time job with Duke Corporate Education, and Duke Corporate Education and Leah contribute to this program through Leah's time and the time of some of our coaches, including Jane Basu-Caffrey, who also donates her time and also works for Duke Corporate Education, which, by the way, for the 12th year running, is the leading corporate education provider in the world, Duke CE. So we're very honored to have Duke CE as one of our partners, and to have Leah Hood to be such a strong part of our program, as well as her husband, Joe Hood, who really works with the scholars throughout the year. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Leah and Joe, and we're going to get the show going.
Thanks, Dean. So while I hate podiums, I'm going to stand here because the mic's here. And I didn't really prepare for the lav mic today, so this is much better. I'll take this. So, as Dean said, my role is to pull things together. So I wanted to talk a bit about what we heard yesterday and how that will lead into what we'll hear today. As Dean said, and you all know, the theme for this year's forum is distributed leadership, how we empower, engage, educate, bring people together to be the kind of leaders we need to be to take on the challenges that we're facing in today's context. And that got kicked off front and center first thing yesterday with Dr. Washington. And I said this at the end of the day yesterday, but I want to bring it back first thing this morning. I thought it was really apropos. He said, to realize the full potential of the opportunities we have today, we need leadership. And it needs to take on a new form. It needs to leverage what whole institutions can bring. It takes distributed leadership, and you need the right kinds of leaders to do that. So it's not just the way that we're doing it, but it's who is doing that, who is bringing together those leaders, those others in the institutions to take on these challenges. Then we got to hear from Eric Shoemaker about leading up, down, and sideways. And he told this fantastic story about what he needed to do in his leadership to transition Landstuhl Army Medical Center from 300 beds to 1,000 beds, and how he and his team were really working on this, and they couldn't quite figure out how to do it fast enough. And it was an ops officer who had purportedly no knowledge of hospitals or hospital systems who came in from the side and offered a solution that worked. That's what this is all about, right? That's what he said to us. That's the kind of leadership that we need to be cultivating, where somebody who doesn't believe he or she necessarily has the expertise in the core elements that everybody else in the room has can bring that voice forward and help us solve those problems. That's what it's going to take, again, in these times of change and opportunity. And he also talked about, rather than as a leader looking to be the biggest piece of the puzzle in the middle, that what we need to do is be the seams in that puzzle, be the glue that brings that puzzle together, really touching and understanding each piece and its shape and its form and what makes it special so that we can bring those together to really fit in the best ways they can fit together. And the last thing that he said, and this was the theme that I saw pulling through each of the comments that we heard yesterday, was the importance of context and this notion of how context matters. And Eric talked about at the USUHS leadership curriculum that he's pulled together, how context is at the core and that values are also at the core. And we heard a lot about values yesterday and how values can create a context through which our leadership can spring, right? We heard from Alex Gorski. Man, wasn't he impressive? I mean, no kidding. Amazing that we were able to have him here speaking to us. He talked about Johnson & Johnson's credo and how that is at the core of everything that that organization does and how important it is for organizations to have that kind of rock-solid value system that can create the culture that is the context that people live in. You know, it's interesting. On the way here this morning, got in the car, turned it on, and NPR was on, and it was the People's Pharmacy. Did any of you hear that this morning on the way in? And it was Stephen Brill who was speaking, who just wrote the book, America's Bitter Pill. And he was sharing a story about interviewing, well, he was sharing a story about having gone into the hospital. And the day he arrived home, he had 36 individual envelopes from his insurance company, each detailing a specific thing that he had done or, you know, procedure or medication or something and how they were going to deal with it. And he opened one up, and it was for some medication. And it said, amount charged, $0. Amount reimbursed by the insurance, $0. Amount you owe, $158. And so he tried to figure out what the heck this meant, couldn't figure it out, gave it to his wife, who's a lawyer. She couldn't figure out what the heck it meant. Turns out he had an interview with the CEO of his insurance company two weeks later. So he went in, did his interview, And at the very end, he pulls out this letter and he hands it to him. And he says, can you help me figure out what this means? And the guy looks at it. And he looks at it. And he said, I'm sorry, I could sit here and look all day, but I won't be able to explain to you what this means. And I as I was listening to this, I sat back and thought, Alex Gorski wouldn't have had that answer, right? Because the patient-centeredness that's at the core of the Johnson & Johnson credo would have led him to a different kind of answer and a different kind of solution for this person. I mean, he went on to talk about 2 or 3 emails that he got from different people around the insurance company, and basically everybody said, nope, can't explain it to you. And that was sort of the answer. And that's what we need to do, again, is figure out what is at our core. What is the context that we're creating for our people as leaders ourselves that can then translate down to our people so that we're able to distribute leadership to them, to engage them, to empower them to do the things that are going to be important to us, to get the things done that we need to get done that are important to us. And that's what we heard as well from our 2 speakers at the end of the day. From Mary Klotman, who's the chief of medicine here at Duke, and from Bob Salas, who's a family practitioner on a mission. That creating that context matters, and helping other people see the value that you're bringing, how it can do something positive for them, that can really bring people into your message. How that common mission, right? Mary talked about it's easy here at Duke because everybody shares that common mission. And so it's easy for her to distribute leadership and to bring people in. Bob talked about using the data to create a platform. And then Mary even talked about at the end how early in your career, it's about using your skill, showing people that you have some expertise to use as a platform to make it easy for them to say yes, to let you in, or to join whatever mission it is that you're trying to accomplish. Speaking of Bob's mission, last night at the end of the session, Don Bradley, are you here this morning? Don Bradley grabbed me and said, you know, there's this thing that I like to do that I think you should do at the end of sessions or throughout sessions, and I'd like us to try it today. Every time we want to give somebody a round of applause, we're all going to stand up. A little bit of extra motion, a little bit of extra movement, and everybody gets a standing ovation. How cool is that? So I'm going to encourage us to do that throughout the day. Speakers, don't freak out when everybody stands up every time they want to clap for you, okay? All right, so the last piece that we heard were the scholars. And I would say that both scholars groups even brought this notion of context through in what they were saying. So we first heard from the Feagin leadership model team, and they talked about the need to keep the patient at the center of everything we do as medical professionals. That's the context within which we need to do everything else, and for how we frame our leadership as medical professionals. And then you heard from the summit team about resilience, and sometimes how the context that's been created in medicine about physicians as the experts with all of the knowledge can create a context where we may not be asking for help. We may not be distributing leadership as easily as we might otherwise, and how that can create challenges for us with our resilience, with our ability to be balanced. And so we got a little window into maybe what next year's forum will have to offer with the topic of the resilient leader. And so today, we're going to continue with these themes, pulling this theme through. As Dean said, we have a fantastic docket for you with the highlight of the final Leadership Scholars presentation. But to kick things off, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Doty, who will introduce our first speaker of the morning, and then we'll go from there. So Joe.
Kenny, you already got a standing ovation and you haven't said a word yet. It's not very often you get to introduce your best friend. I've known Kenny since 1978. He's like a brother to me in more ways than I can tell you. It's interesting that Dean made the comment about him in the hockey and Kenny as lacrosse players in terms of, well, and they still graduated from West Point. I can tell you there was never a doubt academically that either of those two were going to graduate. Very, very, very bright. Kenny is subtly bright. He knows a lot about a lot, but he has zero errors about it. So he's a fascinating sample. The other thing interesting about Kenny is he's the second best athlete I've ever known. And my definition of an athlete is you could just pick up a sport like this, you go golf and you're good. You play basketball and you're good. And if you're interested in who's the first best, we'll talk during a break. And lastly, if you look up, in our model we have selfless service, and if you pull out a dictionary and you looked up selfless service, there would be a picture of Kenny Dahl and his wife Celia. So without further ado, Kenny Dahl.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, man. Thank you, sir. So let me tell a quick Joe Doty story, and I think the folks, the scholars in particular, the people who work with him will not be surprised to hear this. So I've known Joe since we were 17 years old, and when we were in our very first year at West Point during the summer training, we got our very first weekend that we were able to leave. And it was after a hard week, and I went and I thought, this is great. It happens to be the same weekend as my birthday. I was still dating the girl from high school, and I only lived in Peekskill, which is 20 minutes away. I said, wow, this is going to be terrific. And then I went and checked the guard roster, and I found out that I was the guy who was supposed to guard the barracks over the weekend, and I was going to lose, that weekend off. Well, Joe, picked up on that, and he came up to me and says, hey, look, I'm from New Mexico. I got nowhere to go this weekend anyhow, so why don't you take the leave, and I'll pull your guard for you. And I said, well, that's a good friend. So I had a great weekend. I bought back a big, giant roast beef sandwich to Joe because I felt sorry for him. And then I found out a couple days later that Joe and I have the same birthday. And so I tell you that story because some of you got to be sick about hearing about West Point. Because we talk a lot about it, but there's an awful lot of overlap between West Point, the Army profession, Duke, and West Point. So, but I tell you that because Joe was that way when he was 17. Joe was that way when he arrived at West Point. And West Point sort of nurtured a lot of that and pulled him through a program that developed that and made him a great leader. I think precisely the same thing is happening here at Duke. The seed corn's pretty darn good. Okay, the folks who come into the program are very, very good. But you have to understand that you develop that, you nurture it. Okay, you can't come in being very, very good and leave the same. You should come in very, very good and leave much, much better because of the opportunities that you have for doing this. So I'll start there, and I'm just going to quickly tell a few little stories, and then I want to get into, we're going to talk about distributed leadership and empowerment. I want to talk about what it means to be a member of a profession, because I think that's very, very important, and I think there's some healthy argument that really should take place, and I sort of would like to introduce that, to the group, as well. So I came in from Seattle, and someone asked me, I was getting my coffee. They said, where's your aide? Isn't your aide getting your coffee? Well, my aide's not here because I'm on leave. So I flew out from Seattle, on leave because Joe said, can you come out? And I said, of course I can come out. And this is not a program, what I'm doing here isn't something that the Army is going to allow me to do while I'm on duty and I said, it's not a problem. I'll just take leave and come out. I'm very happy to do that. When I am in, Nate this morning, when we were doing prayers before breakfast, Nate said, God, Lord, thank you for waking us up this morning. And I thought to myself, amen, but I could have used a couple extra hours. So if the jet lag gets to me, forgive me. But flew in from Seattle, and in Seattle, when I often go up to Seattle, it's about an hour drive from where I am on the Puget Sound to go up and talk to different groups, corporate entities, chambers of commerce, universities, whatever it might be. And the traffic is horrible. So you got to leave early. So I leave early enough to get there so that I don't show up late. I end up getting there 20 minutes beforehand. So then I usually go to a Starbucks or one of those little coffee shops and get a cup of coffee. I'm often dressed like this. It's very, very common for someone to come up and say, thank you. Here, let me buy your coffee for you. And then I get my coffee and they say, thank you for your service in the Coast Guard. And it happens more often than it doesn't happen. And I thought to myself, I really need to get out more, really need to get out more. But it is humbling. I mean, it's humbling. So there's a point there. It is humbling because you think that you are well understood. You think you are well known. You think you are, revered and have this certain status. And then you find out they don't know you at all. So we really do have to make, more efforts, to get out and do that. And I will tell you, I would ask you to consider that here, as well. So here's a Duke example of that. Last time I was here, my daughter, who's now 22, she was looking for colleges. My wife was deployed in Iraq at the time, so she was 16. I was a brand new one-star. We're down there shopping around for schools. I actually went to UNC for graduate school. I knew that they had an ROTC program in nursing, so I said, Madeline, let's go down to UNC. So we did. And then I said, let's go over to Duke because Jamie Spatola and Chris Spatola are good friends of ours. Chris was actually one of my company commanders when we were deployed to Iraq. So I said, I want to go over and see Chris and Jamie anyhow, so we'll take the student tour, the admissions tour over at Duke. This is right after Coach and Jamie had written their book about after the Olympics in China. So we're going on the tour, and I go into the bookshop, and I said, I got to buy a couple of books, Madeline, because my mother just loves Coach K. She's gone now, but she just loved Coach K. And did not know him, never met him, but she just admired the man. And so I said, I got to get a book. I'm going to see if I can get Jamie to sign it. I'm going to give it to my mom. And then there was also a friend who had a daughter who was a big basketball player. She blew her knee out. It was really low. I said, oh, she would just love getting a book, really bring her morale up. So I went in, and I bought a third book, for myself. Went over to the Cameron, saw Jamie, saw Chris. I asked Jamie if she'd sign a book. She said, sure. So she said, hey, why don't we go down, and see my dad? He's in his office. Maybe he can sign it too. I said, that would be great. And we had met a few times. So we go into his office. I bring my daughter in there. So here's the first point. What is Coach K doing in his office during the summer? He's in there by himself, and he's watching an instructional basketball video. Okay, so I'm thinking Coach K is watching an instructional basketball video? Okay, there was some talk yesterday about lifelong learning. Okay, it goes back to really good seed corn, but you never stop learning. You never stop developing yourself. You have to imagine, I am not that good. I can always be better. I can always improve myself. So I pointed that out to my daughter. My daughter had absolutely no idea who he was. Honest to goodness. Okay, she had no idea who he was. I said, come on, Madeline, really? She said, well, first of all, his name's Krzyzewski, right? I said, yeah. She said, well, why do they call him Coach K if his name is Krzyzewski? I said, well, that's the way it's spelled. This is a high school, from Northern Virginia, good high school in Northern Virginia. So I said, come on, text 10 of your friends and ask them. She got back 10 answers. 8 of them did not know who he was. Okay? 4 of them were boys. The 2 who did know were girls, athletes. I said, okay. So we go in to see Coach K, and we're sitting there, and Jamie's in there. So he says, what are y'all doing down here? He says, well, we were over at UNC this morning. So Jamie goes like this. I mean, her visceral reaction, a physical reaction to hearing Chapel Hill's, UNC in Coach's office. Of course, Coach, just smooth as a cucumber. He loved it. It's a great school. A lot of respect for it. Good nursing program. That's not what you're interested in. Of course, he's an excellent recruiter, as well. So he handled all that really well. And then he sees that we're tired because it's late in the day and we had missed lunch. So he says, got a big thing of apples there. He says, Madeline, have an apple. She says, no, thank you. I'm very kind of you. She says, no, really, have an apple. He says, come on, they're only $1. She says, $1? We just bought 3 of your books. Now I'm like this. Smokes, just no idea. But I'll tell you, Coach K just, again, smooth as a cucumber. What does he say? He says, nursing, you ought to be going into business, And, but I tell you, the point of those stories is to have humility. I mean, it is to have humility. It's to not see yourself, as so grand that you are putting walls around yourself and then not listening to what's going on around you, not considering opportunities to better yourself. And so I offer those to you, as important points. The point about welcome to your service in the Coast Guard. I think that my profession is being increasingly criticized for being insular. They say, you're hiding behind your gated communities. They call our military posts gated communities. You're in the eyes of an adoring nation, and there is a certain truth to that. We are being held right now in very, very high regard. We do live, on our campuses, so to speak, behind the gates. It is increasingly insular. We're sort of recruiting ourselves, and there's a danger to that. I mean, there's a danger. That's not really healthy for the organization. It's not healthy for America. And I would ask you, to consider what's the situation at Duke. Are you too insular? Are you open to the outside? So here's a couple things I heard yesterday, and this is a little controversial. I realize this. But yesterday, I heard people referring to a hospital in New York as that other institution. Or they wouldn't even say New York, actually. They said up north, up north. And I know you're reaching out and you want, but to be, to sit there and say, gee, are they uncomfortable saying Mount Sinai? Are they uncomfortable saying, New York? I mean, are you looking that closely internally, that you're not opening yourself up to the possibility that there is excellence elsewhere? And we are in danger of that in the military. I talk to my people all the time. I said, look, you are different, than the people outside the gate. You must be different than the people outside the gate. And this is an important argument that we'll have. And I'll skip to this. I was going to get to this later, but let me do it now because I think it fits. I talk to our folks and I say, look, how much influence should American society have on the military? As American society and American culture changes and progresses and policies open up, how much of that should it change inside the military? And then, of course, the corollary to that is how distinct should the values and the culture of the military be because of the things that we have to do? And that's a really important question. And it's not one that's being argued. It should be argued. It should not just sort of happen. It should not be, that's too politically correct, that's too dangerous, that's a third rail, we can't talk about that. I completely disagree with that. I think it has to be argued, and it should be openly argued and debated. And I think you have to ask yourselves the same thing. I listened to a little bit of this yesterday. How much should the business aspects of medicine, the financial aspects of medicine and healthcare, how much should that impact the culture, of being a doctor or being a healthcare professional or delivering care? And this whole thing that came in yesterday, is it a patient or is it a client? Okay, and someone pointed it out, saying, hey, I really appreciate you using that legacy word, patient. Okay, well, you ought to be debating, should that be a legacy word? Or should we reject client? And I don't know what the answer is. I'm not certain that I know what the answer is for my military example either. But I do know that there should be some healthy arguments, some healthy debate going on. I would certainly think that the young folks in the room ought to be generating that and demanding it. You can't just sort of sit there and take these things and think, well, that's too touchy. That's too touchy. So have the debate and get on with it. I do want to make one quick comment about the 17 to 24-year-old population. I think it was General Schoolmaker. I can't call him Eric. He asked to be called Eric. But he mentioned yesterday, some of you may not have been here, but in the 17 to 24-year-old population in the United States, only 24% are capable of joining the military right now. Okay, so let me say that another way. 76% of all the 17 to 24-year-olds in this great nation, and these are your neighbors, nephews, nieces, friends, cannot join the military. 76%. Why is that? Well, they're obese. They're not high school graduates. They have a criminal record. They're on a psychotropic drug. They got a behavioral health issue. They're not physically fit enough to meet the demands. 5 years ago, it was 28%. Now it's 24%. And it's trending in the wrong direction. Okay, so why do I bother you with that? One, because you are about keeping people healthy. You're about preventing people from becoming unhealthy. You have got to fix that. You have got to fix that. Okay, this is a national problem. It's a problem for me because I got to recruit from that. Major League Baseball told me when I was a colonel, Major League Baseball told me, Colonel, you got a recruiting problem. I said, I don't have a recruiting problem. I'm in the Army. It's your Army. You have a recruiting problem. And the problem is, we have an increasingly small population to draw from. They said, well, what do we do about that? I said, well, you're all very wealthy people. You didn't get wealthy because, you got lucky. You're smart. So be creative and figure out all these people who you have in the palm of your hands in the sports entertainment network. Turn some things around. Get them healthy. Get them through high school. Keep them out of jail. Keep them out of criminal records. Get them off of drugs, etc. We have got that. Really is a huge problem. So I would ask you, take that one on. I can't fix that. But we're not doing a very good job, and again, it's trending in the wrong direction. The other thing I would tell you, the other reason I tell you that is because people have the wrong view of people in the military. A lot of people still think that the legacy view, people in the military are in the military only because they had no other options. That may be the truth for Joe and I when we joined, but it's no longer the case. So I would tell you, when they get out of the military, if you're looking for somebody to hire them. Why wouldn't you hire them? We pre-screen them for you. They're coming from the top 24%. And we taught them some leadership. And they have good focus. They show up on time. They get a high rate of volunteerism. They're very productive. You can count on them. So, again, and now some people say, well, what about the PTSD thing? Well, people who have deployed, some of them, have PTSD. But I shouldn't have to convince this audience that is something that can be treated and you can be cured of and that you can move on. I'll also tell you that the bulk of what we're calling PTSD, the great amount of it, is what you were calling yesterday burnout. Okay, so what do you need to recover from burnout? Well, it's the same sorts of things. So I would just tell you that we have, I share all that with you because I think there is quite a lot of overlap between what we do. A little bit more about the profession, and then we'll talk a little bit about distributed leadership, and then we'll get on with an exercise that we're going to do. What does it mean to be a profession? Certainly, as an Army officer, from the very, very beginning, I was taught this is a profession, and I believe the same is true, for the medical profession. And again, that's another one that I think you should spend some time considering. What does that mean? I think that's one of the things that makes you distinct from outside the profession. You have a shared set of values, and you'll be arguing about what those values are. Because when you argue about them, then you come to agreement on them, and then you internalize them. And then you figure out maybe we ought to adjust them a little bit, or maybe not. But consider what your values are, and argue them and internalize them. You have a creed. Okay, we have a creed, you have a creed. You take oaths. You pay attention to, you have an ethic. There is an ethic. There's an integrity aspect to it. There's a morality aspect to it being in a profession. I would also tell you that it's self-policing. Professions are self-policing. You hold yourselves accountable. You have a very, very high internal standard, and you do not need people outside the profession to hold you accountable for inappropriate behavior. Inside the Army, you've seen a number of general officers, in fact, who have been thoroughly embarrassing of us in the last, few years. I do not have a problem with that because they've been held accountable, and they've been publicly held accountable, and that's going to happen. It's a very, very large organization. It's a very large profession. You have a very large profession. Okay, so when people are not meeting the standard, they're violating the values, they should be called out, they should be held accountable. It's healthy for the organization. It's healthy for everybody else who is adhering to that high standard and doesn't want to see it eroded. So there's quite a lot going on there when it comes to the profession. And I think it's worth arguing. A little bit about distributed leadership and empowerment. So I've been studying leadership, teaching leadership, and involved in leadership for a very long time. And you see these every once in a while, and right now distributed leadership or empowering, is one of these things where it's sort of the topic of the day. So there's a lot of discussion about it, there's a lot of books about it, and then everybody sort of just takes it in without too much not enough critical thought, I guess is what I would say. So certainly there is a very, very good reason to empower subordinates, empower others, to distribute leadership so that you can take full advantage of all of that. But there's also times when you should not do it. So when should you do it? Well, you should do it when the people that you're empowering are capable of contributing. Okay, so in the Army, I say, well, don't empower the privates. Okay, I mean, they're brand new to the Army. They don't know that much. These are people who really need to be sort of given direction, and being told what to do. Don't empower the brand new second lieutenant. These are people who aren't really ready to be empowered. They probably don't want to be empowered quite yet. Doesn't mean you don't include them in conversation. It doesn't mean you don't pull them along. But wait until they have fully indoctrinated the values, until they signed up for the code, after they said the oath a few times, and then they're on board. They're part of the profession. They're skilled. They're educated. They got a good set of experiences, and then you start empowering them. So be careful. Don't just sort of blanket empower. Consider, the individual. Also consider the context, the situation. Is it urgent? Is it urgent? Is this urgent? Is it a very, very high-risk situation? Should I drive it? Mary said yesterday when she was sitting on the panel, she said, sometimes it's just got to come from the top. There's other times when you can open it up. Because there may be an opportunity there because you've got enough time to even fail or not do so great, and then sort of capture some lessons learned, recover from it, and then move on, and everybody grows together. But that's not always the case. And it's not always the case in my profession. I don't think it's always the case in your profession. So certainly empower, but don't do it without some real consideration as to what's the context, how much risk are we taking by doing that, can we learn from it, will we get a better answer? The other thing is, when you have a great deal of diversity, and I certainly sign up for a great deal of diversity, particularly when you have a very, very complex problem, and you want to get as much diversity involved as you can. But I will go back to, if you're doing it just because you want to say, I had a diverse crowd, or I had a diverse group, then you're really not taking advantage of it. You can gather the diverse individuals, but you also have to have the patience to listen to what they have to say, the humility to open up your mind to think that they may have a better answer to this than I do. So you're not just humoring them, you actually are drawing them in and incorporating the full value of that diversity into your consideration. And you have to present an environment where they are willing to contribute. They are comfortable contributing. Just one example. I was the investigating officer for the Sergeant Bo Bergdahl desertion case. I flew to Washington, D.C. I got my orders, and they said, okay, you have to do an investigation and tell us what was the reason or what was on the mind of this young infantry private on a platoon little outpost in Afghanistan. So I'm flying back to Seattle, and I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, I'm 54 years old, and I'm a 2-star general, so I need some help, doing this. Well, it wasn't just, legal help. I needed an infantry platoon sergeant. I needed, some people who were currently living, in that environment, and to get them on a team. I gathered signal intelligence experts and financial experts, forensic psychiatrists, a survival psychologist, some court recorders, some investigators, several investigators. I brought all these people in, and then we took a great deal of time in the beginning of the investigation to make sure everybody was comfortable so that when we sat at the table, it wasn't the general sitting at the head of the table and everybody was waiting for me to call on. They were very happy to debate. And we got to an environment where I was really listening, and they were talking. And I'll tell you where the real value came from. It wasn't from the expertise that I had picked them for in the first place. It was just because they contributed in ways I never imagined. I ended up with 22 folks. I think I had 11 enlisted soldiers, 9 officers, and two civilians. And I had it was about not quite half male and female, and then all sorts of races. And that's just because that's the way the Army is. I did not look for ethnic diversity. I pulled the people together, and I said, wow, look at that. That's just the way your Army is. That's just the way your military is these days. So a lot of power there. But I was sitting there I was reading some of this stuff, and I said, wow, this is scary. Listen to what he said. And I'm reading some of the stuff that he had written in his log. And I start going down this path. Well, I had a 25-year-old sergeant, a woman who was a legal expert, and she said, sir, that comes right out of Warcraft or whatever the game is. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. If she had sat there and was quiet, wasn't comfortable as a young buck sergeant introducing that, we would have been down this road of, listen to this crazy stuff that he's thinking. Well, he wasn't thinking it. He was taking notes from, when he had been playing, Warcraft. So lots of diversity is important, but you have to have an environment where they are willing to contribute, and you have to have the humility to take their input and accept it and move yourself into another direction. So I'll stop there. Again, I think that you're in a profession. I think you should understand what it means to be in a profession. I think you should argue the aspects of that profession. It's very, very healthy to do that. Don't be afraid to do it. I think empowering is good. Distributed leadership is good, but it's not always good. You got to think through, should I do it? How should I do it? Who should I do it with? What is the context? And balance all those things. And then I've got a lot of other things I like to say, but maybe we'll get to them in the questions after our exercise. So, Leah, over to you.
Perfect setup.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
So we are going to have the chance to ask General Dahl some questions. But first, I want you all to have a conversation with one another about what we just talked about. So we've all been in situations where we've had a choice. Do we do it ourselves, or do we bring our teams in? Do we distribute? How do we empower? How do we engage? Do we have the right people? Is it the right context? Is it the right time? Is it the right task? Is it the right situation? And how do we figure that out? So what I'd like you to do for the next 10 to 15 minutes or so is have a conversation at your tables. And I don't want you to debate the philosophy of when is it the right task or when is it the right time. What I'd like you to do is think about some stories from your experience about when somebody did this really well, brought a team together, and which of those elements that leader pulled on. How did they think, boy, I have the right people, it was the right time, it was the right task or situation? Or, even better, if you can find one of these and you're willing to tell it, a story when it didn't go so well. When somebody tried to bring a team together, tried to distribute leadership, and it kind of backfired. And which of those elements, if it was you as the leader, because I think those are the most powerful stories to learn from, could have done something differently, what you might have done differently. How might you have set the context better for the success of the team? How might you have thought about the team you brought together, or the way you positioned the task, or created the environment where people were willing to bring their voices forward? Got the task? Yeah? All right, 10 minutes at your tables, and then I'm going to ask for some stories. We had some very interesting dialogue up front here. Who has a good story of maybe one where things didn't quite go as well as you might have hoped and something that you learned from it? Which element of setting the context, having the right people, it being the right task or the right time or the right situation wasn't quite there? Anybody have one of those good ones that maybe you heard at your table that you'd like to nominate a friend to tell? Ah, right here. Mike's coming your way.
break the ice. Kevin Schulman here from Duke. So I was on the governor's task force for health information technology a couple years back. The first of the 4 or 5 different iterations the states tried to get medical records to communicate. And we all got together to convene as a task force, lots of people from different disciplines, and basically it was a failure. And the issues actually, afterwards, we debriefed actually the chair of the task force myself, and one of the issues was you're really trying to understand the perspectives of the different people around the room at the beginning. And so while we had been commissioned to write this report, some of the people there were supportive of it, some of the people were observers, and some of the people obviously were trying to obstruct it. And so, you know, how do we know, we didn't spend enough time at the beginning, and we didn't spend enough time concurrent with it, working through those issues.
Yeah, any?
Good. Yeah, no, I think that, that there's work that needs to be done up front, I think, you know, making sure everybody buys into what is the goal, you know, what is the objective. And somebody mentioned yesterday, you know, how do you select the team? Well, you need to select the team the select members, you know, on your team who want to move in the same direction. Not necessarily landing at precisely a particular location or how you get there, but generally speaking, you know, are supporting the values that want to take you where you want to go, and you got to do that work up front and sort that out, that early debate. Otherwise, you end up, like you said, some people are going to be in there, they're actually going to be undermining, you know, what it is that you're trying to do. So building a shared understanding, a common understanding, you know, and awareness of where everybody can contribute, and then pulling all that together into some kind of commonality. I think, and I don't know if this came up in this particular case, but it also has to do with echelon. You know, when you're empowering, it's what echelon are you operating at? And when you want to empower others, really what you're trying to do is to get them to do as much as they can at their level. But you don't necessarily want them doing what needs to be at the lowest level. You don't want them doing what has to be done at the mid-level or at your level or even at the higher level. So you want to empower at echelon and get every echelon working. So what I mean by echelon? Well, it's hierarchical. I mean, your business is as hierarchical as mine is, I think. I know universities are, and I think the hospitals are, and the militaries are, yet there's a tension between that hierarchy and wanting to be flat, because we know there's lots of value in being flat. So how do you fix that tension between the hierarchy and wanting to be flat? And that's where empowering comes in, but you got to empower at echelon. So you don't want to frustrate people by giving them responsibility that's way beyond the echelon where they are prepared to contribute or even want to contribute. So one way to sort of sum that up is do the things that only you can do, and let others do, the things that can be done by others. Because then you find yourself doing too much. So if somebody else can do it, let them do it, and challenge them, But if you're the only one who's capable of doing this, and it goes in the other direction too. So that's empowering down. You also want to lead up. We talked a little bit about leading up yesterday. If you see the people above you not necessarily doing a great job or not necessarily being fully informed by some opinions, then you can lead up. You got to be careful, how you do that. But I think that's empowering at echelon is how we deal with taking hierarchical organizations and trying to benefit from making them more horizontal, more flat.
Thanks for starting, Kevin, and the remarks. Thank you. Another story. Who has another story? All right, we've got 2 up here. We'll start in the back with Ross, and then we'll bring it forward to Nick.
All right. I'm not going to share the whole story, but Lottie here had some great comments that I think from a teen dynamic standpoint were really pertinent. The first was when she said people noticed her limitation, they started treating her differently and engaging her differently in the team. And so I thought about yesterday with the burnout, about a lot of times we don't notice limitations, but if we did, how would we go about acting a little bit differently? And then to build on that, she talked about what does somebody really want that has a limitation? And do we take the time to build a trusting environment to really get down to the core of what they want? So I think that that team dynamic, when we have strong players and then we have different limitations on that team, is how do we bring out the best in the whole team?
Yeah, one of the things that, interestingly, and you heard from Dean earlier that I do a lot of corporate education that's come up in my corporate clients, many of whom lead professions. So I have engineering services clients and accountants, and so they share a lot of the underlying core values that many of you in this room share, is this notion of creating inclusion. And it really is about, what are people bringing to the team? How do I understand the strengths and the limitations and create an environment where those limitations are acknowledged but still welcomed? How do I bring the rest of that along? And I think that's a particular challenge for leaders.
And I think in trying to tap into some of that, I mean, my personal philosophy of how I go about leading is I go to work and I'm trying to figure out how do I make other people successful. My superiors, that's leading up. I want them to succeed, and I don't see them doing very well, or something's wrong here. So I try to lead up, not for my benefit, but for their benefit and for the organization's benefit. I try to help my peers, but I'm also trying to help the people at the lower echelons. And I spend most of my time doing that. So I'll ask them, how can I help you? What do you need? Do you need more resources? I'll see if I can get you more resources. Do you need more time? Is the suspense unrealistic? Do you need me to set priorities for you? Do you have too much on your plate and we're trying to do too much and nobody's bothering? We're terrible about this across the board right now. I can't imagine your world's terribly different than mine. But right now, there's a lot of leadership that's failing to set priorities. Everything's a priority, which means nothing's a priority. So I often say, okay, look, if we can't decide what the priorities are, let's at least decide what's at the bottom of the priority list. What are we going to not do? And strategic leadership really is the art of deciding what not to do so that you can reinvest time and effort, on other things. That's very, very empowering and very, very helpful, to people at echelons, because now they can focus their work. They're not, spread like peanut butter. Sometimes I ask them, sometimes it's a policy. God, this policy is just crazy, and it's archaic or a regulation. Well, okay, I'll take that on. I'll see if I can get the policy changed. Sometimes they say, well, what you could do is leave me alone. I mean, I got everything I need. You keep bothering me, asking me what you could do to help me. Just leave me alone. Okay, I got it. Good. I'll go over here. That's a fair answer. It's a good answer. And I walk away going, I'm really glad that person was comfortable saying, sir, if you just leave us alone, we'll knock this out, in a couple of days. Don't need your help right now. So I think that's how you can kind of avoid, having somebody who's got something to contribute and isn't given the opportunity to make that contribution, or who's being undervalued, and not fully appreciated.
Great, yeah, Nick.
Nick told us his story, and I just thought I'd tell it for him because I don't want him to tell it. But, he was the captain of the Duke soccer team for 3 years. I mean, that's pretty incredible to start with. It also means that there was a lot of peer buy-in when he got chosen as a sophomore to be the captain of the team, which is also pretty incredible. Says a lot about him. But NCAA college teams are very much like hospitals in some ways, armies in some ways, in that you get selected by maybe the coach because you're the coach's pet, maybe you're the best player on the team, maybe you're just the most liked person on the team. None of those indicate you have any leadership ability. They just indicate that for some reason you were chosen to be a leader. So there's the chances of a captain on a team succeeding in college is random. And we all know that when you watch college teams and captains on those teams. Some of them succeed well and some of them fail miserably. What got them to be so good as a player was they were very internally focused, maybe, that allowed them to become so good as a player. And now as a leader, they're expected to be externally focused, and they can't do it well. And they have their most miserable year playing the sport, whatever it is, because all of a sudden what drives them before is now something different. Well, what Nick had to deal with was a situation where he had a very good player who was a disruptor on the team, and it was causing the team to fail. And I think from what I get from Nick, when he takes over as that leader for the first time, he takes the burden of all decisions. He lives in this little bubble that can't exist as a leader outside of it. No, I can't talk to anybody. I'm the leader. I have the burden of making this decision. And he's leading his peers on top of that. It's a very difficult situation. Fortunately, Nick resolved it it took him 18 months. But as you watch, Nick got the chance to repeat being a team captain. Now he's building on a year of leadership already. And by his senior year, you know, when you talk to Nick, you start hearing how he's saying, we made this decision, we made that decision. And really what he did when he walked in the first day of his senior year is he looked around and he identified all the informal leaders on his team, the guys he's going to go to get things done. And I bet you even internally evaluated how he was going to use each one of those individuals, because he realized he's not going to make decisions in a vacuum anymore, and he needs team help to do it. Pretty interesting story, and thanks for sharing it, Nick.
Thanks for sharing Nick's story. Yeah, I think I was sharing a story about how I completely bumbled my first leadership in a very similar way, taking it all on, not recognizing who the leaders in the team were, and how you can use those leaders. And we heard so many of our speakers yesterday talk about that, talk about finding those leaders and bringing them forward.
I think Sammy reminds me of the blocking and tackling of leadership. And somebody mentioned yesterday, how do you lead when you don't have the authority to lead? Without authority. Well, frankly, when you have the authority, it's pretty darn easy. And if you go back to the blocking and tackling of leadership, okay, so the 5 sources of power and influence over other people in leadership. So you can reward them, they'll do it because you're going to be able to reward them in some way. You can punish them, they'll do it because if they don't, then you're going to punish them in some way. Those things don't work very long or very well. Sooner or later there's no value in whatever it is that you can reward them with. It just loses valence almost right away. And the punishment, whatever it is, just sort of it's not as painful anymore. Over time. None of those things are very fun anyway. That's just really not inspiring, and they don't last very long. They're very short-term strategies. If you have the authority, then they're good. Then they may do it to the extent that they respect, that authority. But over time, that also erodes if that's the only way that you're leading. They may do it because you're an expert. They may follow you because you're an expert. So I have the authority. Those are on the shoulder boards. In you, it's the lab coat or something like that. That works, to an extent, but that's not very inspiring. The expert, okay, so that's what all this is. Dr. Feagin, I was going to put my Feagin medal on here to see if you could find it. It would be like, so where's Waldo? But put my little Feagin pin on here. But that, frankly, that's what the medals sort of represent your expertise. And some people want to follow you because, hey, he's going to get us there, because he has that expertise. And you have that too. It's all those letters after your signature block, your credentials, they're out there. But the last one is referent power, and it goes beyond all of that. And it's getting people to do what you want them to do, or they want to follow you because they don't want to disappoint you. They respect you. They don't necessarily have to like you, for referent power to work. They just have to respect you and your relationship, and they don't want to disappoint you. And that's where leading in the absence of authority becomes very, very important. It's in that last referent power. And a lot of what we've been talking about all day yesterday, and today, really has to do with referent power. It's getting to referent power. I mean, understanding referent power is sort of transformational leadership, and that's the way you want to go. It's great to understand that sort of intellectually, but how do you do that? And we've been talking about that for 2 days. Yes, sir. Referent. Yeah. Referent. Yeah. Referent. Yep. Referent power. Now it's transformational leadership. So they're not, again, there's, it's not because you're going to punish them. It's not because you're going to reward them. It's not simply because you have the authority. It's not simply because you're an expert. It's because you have a relationship with these people, with this individual, and they don't want to disappoint you. They don't want to disappoint you. They're going to do what you're asking you to do. They're going to get on board. They're going to work harder. They're going to get behind you because they don't want to disappoint you. They believe in what you're doing. And I think, again, empowerment gets you, a long way, towards doing that. Having humility gets you a long way towards doing that. Listening to what they have to say, opening yourself up. Real diversity. Not diversity just to say, hey, look at the diverse table I've put together here, but actually keeping your mouth shut, listening to what they have to say, giving them opportunities, to grow and develop. They see that they're getting a lot out of it, not only collectively, but also individually. That doesn't require authority. So in the absence of authority, that's one way to do it. I would also tell you that in the absence of authority, unless somebody else has the authority, act like you do. Fake it. I do it all the time. I do it all the time. Particularly when I'm in a place like, and Sammy, I know you know this. Particularly when you're in a place like Iraq or Afghanistan. I was the mayor of the Green Zone from 2005 to 2006, the international zone in Iraq. I was a colonel. It was lawlessness. One of my clients, one of my tenants was the Iraqi government. The U.S. Embassy was one of my tenants. 20,000 people who I didn't even know, Iraqis. I had a U.S. brigade, I had an Iraqi brigade, and I was the mayor of the Green Zone. And it was like, how do you take this lawlessness, this wild, wild west, and bring order to it? And so I had two lawyers, two very young women captains, and I said, do I have any authority here? And they said, sir, it's really not clear who has the authority here. And I said, well, is it clear that somebody else does? They said, no. I said, okay, then let's fake it. Let's just fake it. It's just kind of like law at sea. It's really not clear, so you just keep doing it. You establish precedent. Now all of a sudden it becomes a law. Somebody challenges, well, we've been doing it for all this time, so that must be okay. And the one thing that I did have, and then you can also leverage other authorities. So in that particular example, I was the guy who gave you access to the international zone. If you wanted a badge to get in, I'm the one who gave you the badge. Or I took the badge away and you couldn't get in. And of course, everybody wanted to be in, and they wanted to come and go. So I took that one authority that I did have, and I leveraged the heck out of it very, very effectively. And rarely was I challenged on exercising that authority. Because when you're in that environment, chances are, you just start leading, people will follow. I don't want to say people are sheep, but, in the absence of authority and nothing's moving, somebody steps up, guess what happens? People start following. People start following. And then you really, leadership is you lead because people are willing to follow you. People will follow you. So that's a challenge. It's a challenge. But really, it's quite liberating, to be in an environment where there isn't any clear authority, and you can, I use fake it. There's probably a better word for that, but,
There's actually a great TED Talk, Power Poses, if any of you have seen it. Amy, what's her last name?
Yeah.
I've lost her last name. Anybody remember her last name? Cuddy, thank you. Yep. Amy Cuddy. And she talks about fake it till you make it. Yep. And actually things that you can do to help affect your cortisol levels to better prepare you to fake it so you're not quite as nervous when you're faking it. Great TED Talk. Highly recommend going to check that out. Write that down, Amy Cuddy, Power Poses. So we have time for a few questions outside of the realm of the stories. First one in the back here.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. Can you use the mic, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was yelling loud. If you're using this term reference power, doesn't it really boil down to the fundamentals of character, personality, integrity?
I would say it only boils down to those, but I would say those are fundamental, to establishing followers, who are following you because of referent power, that they trust you. So, certainly trust has a big aspect of referent power.
So what would be the other adjectives that you would associate with that?
I'll go back to humility again. No, I'll go back to humility. I think humility has an awful lot to do with it. I really do. And in fact, one of the points I want to make, so I'll take advantage of this question to make the point about faith. Okay, and this is another one of those controversial conversations that I think is worthy of debate. Should we debate the importance of faith in your profession, in my profession, in the development of character, and in leadership? So I think some of the other adjectives would be integrity. Character is important, but I think that's too broad. I think humility is important, but it's not having the label of he has humility or she has humility. It's what the possession of humility does for you. Okay, it makes you a better listener. It makes you more collaborative. It opens your mind and your eyes to the possibility that there is excellence out there, besides, this close to home. And it makes you, I think, resilience, also. I mean, people will trust if they see, a resilient leader, because they know that you're going to get through the tough times, that you're going to overcome adversity, that you're going to persevere, when there's friction out there. You're not going to bail, when the going gets tough. So my personal belief is, and we had where's Rose and Maria? Yeah, we had a great argument last night, but argument in the positive sense. And Sammy, so we were discussing, because there was differences of opinion about whether or not faith, should be a part of this. And I think those are very, very healthy differences of opinion that should be argued. My opinion, and again, this is just from my own experience, is that faith is an important aspect of it, because I think, and I'm not telling you what faith to have, but I think faith draws out self-awareness. Okay, I think self-awareness is, Terry, we talked a little bit about that yesterday, because there's a meditation aspect to it. There's an introspection aspect to it. There's a comparison to an ideal and an aspiration, to an ideal. It reinforces the thoughts of right and wrong. It reinforces selfless service to others, integrity, that morality, that ethic. I think those things are terribly important. So for 15 years, I was very careful never to say anything about faith or religion, as an Army officer, because I said, I am imposing my values on other people. It's very inappropriate. They're not going to be comfortable. And then I got over that. I got over that because about 15 years into it, I realized two things. One, I'm making decisions that are impacting people's lives. And I'm only going to collect information, no matter how diverse the crowd is, no matter how open I am to their input, I'm only going to get to a 60% confidence level or a 90% confidence level. But then I have to decide. So what's that last 40%, that last 10%? Well, for me, it's a leap of faith, and I want to have some confidence in that last 10%. So I invest in my faith so that when I get to that point, I'm more comfortable making a decision and it doesn't come and go and no decision was made and then the moment is lost. The other component of this, and I know this is for next year's topic, is resilience. Okay, I think faith has a huge component in resilience. And what I tell the folks that I work with is that what are the most important things in your life? Well, it's your significant relationships with, your other, your family. It's your job. It's your financial situation. It's your friends. It's your health. But there's going to be times when your health isn't going so well. There's also going to be times when your relationship isn't going so well. There's going to be times when you're down and out financially because, investment didn't work out or you overextended yourself and you didn't realize it. There's going to be a time when your friends, something's gone wrong there. Then there's also going to be a time when nearly all of those things are going wrong at the same time. And when that happens, then you feel like the world's closing in around you. And that's a very uncomfortable place to be. And I think that's when, if you have faith and you invest in it, that you've got a place to stand, and then eventually your financial situation improves. or your relationship with your other improves, or your friends, return, or things get better at work, or whatever it might be. And then you pull yourself through. And when you pull yourself through, I think it was Eric who said yesterday, you are stronger, on the other end of that. But you had a place to stand, at least temporarily, to get you through all that. So I think that, again, my personal opinion, and we had a good argument about this, because not everybody agrees. And I'm not suggesting that you necessarily have to agree with me, but I come all the way out here to Seattle, from Seattle, to share with you my opinion. And my opinion is faith is a very, very important aspect of referent leadership and resilience and nurturing all those kinds of characteristics that are important. So I would encourage you to debate that and not be afraid to talk about it. So.
I think that's the perfect close. Can I invite, Steve up to say a few things to General Dahl?
Yes, sir. It was great to meet you last night, too. And so, on behalf of everyone here at the Foreman, thank you for coming, making the long trip here. It's good for us, as a young, developing healthcare leader, to hear the diversity of views and wisdom and experiences that you can offer to us. And thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you very much. You bet.
Welcome back from the break. And what is really nice for me as kind of the organizer of this leadership forum is we get so many great people involved, and we get to bring so many of our friends here to Duke. For those of you who haven't been to this building before or haven't been to Duke before, I would encourage you to go upstairs, because if you just came in from the hotel and you came in the back entrance, this is our School of Medicine that's now been open for just a couple years, and it's a fabulous building, and the architecture is incredible. And if you go upstairs and go out onto the pavilion and see this building from the outside, and go up to the 5th or 6th floor and look out on the campus, this is a fabulous venue. And if you go out onto the piazza or the plaza or whatever we call it out there, and you see the Cancer Center, and you see the Duke Medical Tower, the new one, the Medical Pavilion, and you can see the old hospital where our clinics are now. You can see Duke North, which was new when I came here in 1981. This is a fabulous venue to hold this, and we're really proud of that. And it's great to show it with all our friends. It's great to bring in a lot of wonderful people here. And the person that embodies the leadership of this entire health system is Bill Fulkerson. And I'd like to have Bill come up as the leader, and really the consistent leader for, 20 years now, Bill. I mean, Ann and I were talking this morning, and Ann was a nurse when Bill was a young fellow, pulmonary fellow, back in 1982. But Bill has been the embodiment of a physician leader, and has really taken our health system and the hospital to new heights. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Bill Fulkerson to give a welcome.
Well, thank you so much, and good morning. It's great to be here. It's the first Feagin forum I've been able to attend, and was very impressed, and I appreciate General Dahl's comments very much this morning. And yes, Ann and I did work together some years ago in the early 1980s. I actually came in 1983, so it wasn't 1982, unless it was somebody else, Ann, around that. But I came here fresh out of my fellowship at Vanderbilt in '83, and came to Duke as a trailing spouse, because I wasn't being recruited, my wife was. She had been a student here and finished her PhD in religion at Vanderbilt, and was coming back to teach in the divinity school in the Graduate School of Religion. And so I came back hat in hand looking for a job, because jobs for her were few and far between at good universities then, and so we tried to make this work. And it was happened to be at the time just as Joe Greenfield became chair of medicine. I'd actually had an offer extended by the interim chair, David Durack, and then Joe Greenfield rescinded it and suggested that I come and talk to him to make sure he wanted to take a chance on me, but it worked out, and Joe's been a big influence on my life and my work at Duke ever since then. There's one other thing, Coach, that I recall about 1983. I was sitting in Wallace Wade Stadium watching a football game, and it was early, probably in September or maybe early October, and the public address announcer came across and said, there are still season tickets left for Duke basketball game, and they will go on sale at the Cameron Indoor Stadium ticket office right after the football game. So my wife and I immediately got up, left the football game, went over and stood in line and bought those tickets, and I suspect that's the last time there were ever tickets for sale for Duke basketball. And I think Mr. Billis was probably a sophomore then, right in that ballpark, with that great team that was coming up. But the remarkable thing about me, to me about coming to Duke back in the early '80s as really an anonymous assistant professor is how easy it was to be here, and how collaborative it was to be here. And it sounds like I wasn't here yesterday, but Mary Klopman may have talked about this as well, because she and her husband were contemporaries of mine on the faculty here at Duke back in the 1980s. And how I seemed to get opportunity after opportunity presented to me. Even while I was still a fellow, but had committed to come here, I was getting calls from Herb Saltzman in pulmonary medicine, Carl Raven in radiology, the head of nuclear medicine here at the time, to start working with them on a RFP from the NIH on how to diagnose pulmonary embolism. And I was just astounded that this opportunity seemed to be there for me, and that they wanted me to help them work on this. These were 4 full professors who were looking for me to come and help. And as we got here and finished the RFP and were successful at getting this grant to study how to diagnose pulmonary embolism, it became more apparent that they were collaborative, but they also expected me to do all the work around that. But then it was time after time with different leaders that I'll just mention a few. I know Rob Califf was supposed to be here yesterday. Rob and I, Rob ran the coronary care unit, which was right beneath my intensive care unit, the medical ICU, and we fought over beds every day. Sometimes it was collegial, and sometimes it was not collegial there. But Rob and I came together and received a grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, probably in the early 1990s, to study decision making in the intensive care unit. And Rob and the team at DCRI and others had skills that I didn't have. They had the statistical background and the clinical trial experience that really, again, at Duke, resulted in a collaborative effort to pull together and really create new information and create new ideas about how to practice medicine. And then a little bit after that, Neil McIntyre in the pulmonary division and I were successful in getting a grant from the NIH to study how we're going to manage acute lung injury at Duke, along with 9 other centers across the United States. And again, these opportunities came because of the character and the quality and the leadership of physicians in our organization that were often established national leaders and were giving me opportunities to come along and work with them. And then sometime after that, and I don't remember exactly when it was, I may have been the chief medical officer of the hospital then, but I remember talking to Jim Urbanek. And it was about resident education. And Jim brought me a folder that was I want to call it the Manual of Orthopedic Residents. This probably wasn't the title, Jim, but you know what I'm talking about. 10 Commandments. And I remember reading through it and talking to Jim about it, and it talked about many of the things that you've heard already the past couple of days. It talked about teamwork. It talked about the respect for everybody on that team. It set out very clearly the expectations for residents. It also set out very clear responsibilities and accountabilities. And I'm talking about down to how you dress, how you interact with different members of the team there when you're representing orthopedics at Duke, and then how you follow through on your commitments. And those things, you know, teamwork, clarification of responsibilities and accountability, clear expectations, realistic targets, following through on commitments are the fundamentals that even that pamphlet, the fundamentals that were embodied there, and I think are the key things to being effective leaders. I became CEO of Duke Hospital in 2002, and it was a rather abrupt change then for a variety of reasons I won't go into. I'd been the CMO for a few years, so I knew something about running hospitals, but there was a lot I didn't know about running hospitals. And it underscored very quickly for me the importance of teamwork and the importance of disseminated leadership that you've talked about for the last 2 days. And I think working with the faculty leaders, physician leaders, and some of our business leaders, that we were able to right the ship a little bit there and have had, I think, a very successful run for our patients and for our institutions for the past 20-some years. So I think it's extremely important to have forums like this where young leaders, those we're going to be looking to be the physician leaders of the future, have an opportunity to hear great leaders across the university, across the country, here to hear, interact, talk to, and understand, and have it reinforced over and over again what the fundamentals of effective leadership really are. So I appreciate the chance, Dean, to be here today, and thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Nice to get standing ovations. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Fulkerson, and we really appreciate you being here. This is special for us, and as good as Dr. Fulkerson's remarks are, as good as General Dahl's remarks were, as good as our next guest speaker's remarks will be. For me, the highlight of today is what's coming next, and Team 2. And I said yesterday, each team thinks they're the best. They obviously think they were the best team and had the best project, and I think that'll come off during their presentation. But I want to say just a brief word about the team experiences, because the team experiences of the Feagin Leadership Scholars are the core of their educational experience. And I think it's essential to what they do. And I really want to thank all our coaches that contribute to that experience. And each team has a coach, and each scholar has an individual coach. So let me see where my coaches are. Prinny Anderson, Kathleen Ponder, Jane Boswick-Caffrey, and Joe Doty. Please stand up, and let's give them a standing ovation. Thank you all very much for all that you do. And now we're going to see the work of Team 2. So you guys come on up.
Good morning, everyone. So we are Team 2. I'd first like to introduce everybody on my team. As Dr. Taylor said, this really is the core of the program. And we've gotten to know each other very well throughout the year, and I know that we've all enjoyed learning and laughing together throughout this entire experience. So to my right, Elizabeth Scott, a medical student in her 3rd year, interested in going to orthopedic surgery. Malini Veerapan, third-year medical student as well, interested in going into ophthalmology. Loretta Urwunse, who's a PGY 10, very glad to be finishing up finally this year. She's a cardiothoracic surgery fellow. And then to her right, James Choi, one of our orthopedic surgery sports medicine fellows. And then Tom Lefevre could not be here, unfortunately, a death in the family. He's also a medical student in his third year, pursuing a career in orthopedics. And then our fearless advisor, Jane Boswick-Caffrey, as well, who kept us on track throughout the year. So there's all of us. We were charged with a difficult task of compiling a documentary which outlined the history and as well as encapsulating the culture of leadership in Duke Medicine in the past, the present, and the future. And I will say that it was very humbling and as well an honor to meet some of the figures that you'll see in our video. So we'd invite you to enjoy the product of our year-long journey.
Since the formal establishment of Duke Medicine in 1930 by the Duke Endowment, with the mission to improve healthcare in the Carolinas, the history of Duke Medicine has become synonymous with leadership in medicine. This rich history is best described by Duke President Richard Broadhead. When Duke was founded as a university, it had a dream, which was, how can you take your regionally admired North Carolina Liberal Arts College and make it a world-class research university? It took a certain strategic intelligence, and Duke University President William Preston Few had the idea to make this place known and then to have it be the substance of world-class excellence. He made two moves. He hired the football coach from the University of Alabama because sports teams carried a name further and faster than anything else, and also decided to make a world-class medical school on a place that had been a forest and pig farm. And both guaranteed the success of this university. Duke is now famous for many things, but wherever it is known for the quality, history, and tradition of Duke Medicine, a tradition that is excellence in leadership.
Because Duke is a leader among those excelling in scholarship. But Duke is truly, to me, unique as an institution that's saying being the leaders, scholars is not enough. We want to be scholar doers in terms of translating what it is that we excel in into real world experiences and real world life improvements.
Duke's place as a leader in medicine has its foundation in the rich history of its values. Among them, excellence, safety, integrity, diversity, and the value of the team.
You have to learn to work with each other in a common purpose. And I haven't found that with too many institutions. But Duke is unique, and I hope we do not lose that feature in the future, because it's the way you get that done.
You know, the thing that I like most, I think, about Duke Medicine is I view it as a team. I think my role as a head of a football program is the same with our leadership in Duke Medicine. You're not going to be very good individually in any big operation. The only way you're going to be outstanding is to have a great team.
There are, in my opinion, in every place, you have talented people who have all the right passion. So the key in leadership is how to draw the very best from these individuals and how to create the opportunity for them to express and realize their passion and value. I think at the end of the day, it is really the culture of continual leadership. Someone at all different levels is thinking about how to do the right thing, how to make things work. That's really quite amazing in shaping Duke's culture.
The principles which have served as the building blocks of Duke medical leadership, excellence in delivering quality patient care, innovative research, and education and training have been intertwined into the fabric of its collective spirit since the inception of the medical school by its founding dean, Dr. Wilbur Davison.
the leadership, the integrity, the cohesiveness, the commitment, it was ever apparent. I mean, you couldn't escape it.
I would start off by saying probably the 2 or 3 driving forces that developed the culture. You'd have to start with Daryl Hart. And so Dr. Hart came down from Hopkins, which had a very regimented program. Dr. Hart saw the importance of developing not just the clinical programs, but the basic science programs, and so the culture that had been established by Dr. Hart. Of course, it flowed quite naturally to Dr. Saveston, but Dr. Saveston took it more in the direction of academics. Dr. Saveston became the premier chairman on the continental shelf. There's no doubt about that.
I think he attracted good people. Major personality, world famous guy. Took care of his own people, had high expectations, and you set the expectations, and your troops will meet it.
So these two men, Dr. Saveston and Dr. Stead, I think were without a doubt the two premier physicians in the United States at that time. Dr. Saveston in surgery and Dr. Stead in internal medicine. We had so they were very, very strong departments. A little bit unlike today, where at that time the departments ran the hospital, ran the medical school. They ran everything.
It is a department where you support and celebrate all missions equally, and that is the clinical mission, the research mission, education. It's all part of what makes the Department of Medicine great. That goes back probably 50 years to the leadership of Eugene Stead. So he really introduced the concept and practice of evidence-based medicine even before it was called evidence-based medicine. But the idea that to practice really high-quality clinical medicine, you had to understand the science behind it.
Because curiosity, learning in depth, was his main emphasis. And the idea was that there was no patient that was boring or uninterested. So the rigidity of hierarchy and labels and titles was not something he paid any attention to. The question was the person motivated? And character of the individual was key. He assumed people would know things, but what was their character? Were they honest, trustworthy, open? Were they capable of perseverance, hard work?
Built in the vision of these titans of medicine and surgery, Duke has experienced remarkable growth in the breadth and depth of its mission, while holding close to its core values during an incredible time of transition and transformation in medicine.
Duke Hospital was built on a platform of excellence. If you go back through the years and look at what prior leaders have said, the Bill Anlians of the world, the Dr. Davidsons, all of the people who were leaders here at Duke Medicine, one word that is always there, it's about excellence.
I would say that I think our leaders have appropriate respect for the past, but they also look to the future, and I'll elaborate a little bit. There are some places where leadership respects the past so much that you're hindered by the past, that you can't move forward because you're paying so much homage that you can't actually think progressively. We are blessed by an entrepreneurial spirit here at Duke, I think because we're a relatively young institution, so we get to look back and enjoy the past and respect the past, but we're always looking forward.
In more recent times, one Duke leader, Dr. Ralph Snyderman, led a significant transformation of Duke University health system and secured Duke's continued relevance in today's healthcare environment.
And one of the general principles that I learned as a leader, or trying to be a leader, is that you never listen enough and you never communicate enough. You could always do more.
he was a remarkable chancellor. And he converted the place from a world-class research institution to a world-class research/health system. And he oversaw this amazing expansion of the healthcare system without losing anything on the research side, which I thought was a remarkable achievement.
One of the stories about Duke that I was very impressed with the power of leadership. And Duke had a very traumatic mishap where there was a transplant that was a mismatched organ into a young woman, and it was very visible publicly. And I was so impressed with how Duke leadership handled what was a very painful experience. And Bill Fulkerson was president of Duke Hospital, I believe, at the time. And what I was impressed was the willingness to go out to the public and say, we made a mistake, and these are all the things we're going to do to redouble our efforts to make sure that we don't make mistakes in the future. And it was very striking how that willingness really allowed both the public as well as Duke to go forward in an event that was really tragic.
Unfortunately, we all make mistakes. Some are more serious than others, but I think when serious mistakes are made, I think that it's extremely important for the leaders in an organization, for others in the organization to admit they made mistakes. Because without doing that, without surfacing that truth about things in your organization or to whatever constituency is important about that, I don't think you'll ever correct it. I think you'll repeat it.
The ability to change and adapt remains a constant requirement, and today's leaders in Duke Medicine embody this quality as they address today's healthcare challenges and seek to define the future.
From a leadership perspective, I think we always have to be reminded of the power of those informal interactions. Leadership, in my view, is not really about some sort of hierarchical process. It's about how do you have relationships with people and effectively get things done in sort of more informal fashion.
And I think in this complex world, having that more distributive leadership where you empower others to collectively accomplish the mission or the goal of patient care, I think that's more effective.
The bigger the idea, the bolder the idea, the more aggressive the idea, the higher likelihood that it's going to happen. Small ideas in Duke Medicine that have small incremental change in a system, really, they don't go far. But big, bad ideas, this is the place to be.
The value of different perspectives has become increasingly recognized in medicine, whether that be gender, profession, or social background. The deans of the School of Medicine and Nursing share their experiences on the importance of maintaining medicine-based leadership in the healthcare of tomorrow.
Women are still underrepresented in medicine in general, particularly in some specialties, and underrepresented in leadership positions in medicine. And I think that the way that that's going to change is by bringing in more women leaders and increasing the critical mass and recognizing that women bring great value to leadership and sometimes have perspectives that are different from what men have, but complementary. And I think the goal, obviously, at the end of the day is to have the same kind of diversity in medicine that we have in all aspects of our real lives.
I think it takes all kinds. I think it takes people from business. I think it takes people from law. But if you don't have some key expert clinicians at the table, you're not going to be making good decisions. There's no question in my mind.
We always have to remember why we do what we do. And I think that is quite unique. And I've always considered that the honor of being in medicine, that you are privileged to provide a very intimate service to people. And everything else that we do eventually can be distilled to that.
We have seen that the history of Duke Medicine has provided a foundation of excellence, and the medical leadership principles of patient-centeredness, integrity, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, teamwork, and selfless service show us a path for the future. Throughout this incredible transformation of medicine over the past century, our culture and values hold steady as we embark upon a bright future in medicine, here at Duke and around the world.
Well, the message to the new group of leaders for Duke Medicine is pretty much the message the old group of Duke leaders had, and that is, first of all, be excited about the opportunity to lead. You've been given a tremendous opportunity not just to be someone who's outstanding in medicine, but someone who's outstanding in the leadership of medicine. What an amazing impact you can have on people, on the medical profession. It's an incredible opportunity. Just remember to be adaptive. You're always dealing with new people. Cultures change, values don't. Values should be embedded. And how you teach them, how you lead people to follow those, to do those values, changes a little bit in strategy as you go forward.
So we hope you enjoyed the video you just watched. As you can imagine, it was a sizable undertaking for a group of residents and fellows and medical students who are not professional videographers. But actually, one of the biggest first challenges we faced was trying to craft a narrative for the story. None of us have been here all that long. We did not live through the era of Dean Davidson and some of those previous distinguished leaders. So we really had to start with going to a small group of individuals and really trying to get from them the story as they saw it of Duke's history, of Duke's leadership now. And as we progressed, we then added on more modern leaders, current leaders at Duke. And we really had to focus in on what questions we were asking. Any of us could go look up on Wikipedia what are the big events that occurred in Duke's history, but we really wanted to hear from individuals about what leadership qualities they thought people possessed that really had allowed them to succeed through those difficult times, or what traits they saw particularly shown by specific leaders in the past and in the present. So I hope you feel, as we do, that we got a great deal of wonderful footage to work with. But it was a challenge.
Good morning. Thanks so much, Liz. So Liz discussed a bit about how we came about the video, but as she had mentioned, there were some challenges, and I wanted to just briefly touch on those. As you can imagine, and it's one of the issues with being at Duke, there are just so many amazing people, and we had lots of great footage and lots of great data from lots of great people, and so trying to figure out, amongst all of the wealth of information that we now had before us in hours of video, how to basically bring that into, basically the pearls that we were going to put into the video, certainly a challenge, but we hope you agree with us that it came about quite well. But the truth of the matter is we could have come up with 20, maybe even 30 different videos depending on just sort of how do we put everything together. And so that was one of our first challenges. And then the second is one that, we see sort of pervasive in all that we do, especially as leaders and rising leaders, is just the balancing of time. And, none of us, as Liz mentioned, do this solely. We would be in trouble if that were the case. But so we all have lives and priorities outside of this project, and so we, balancing, the project itself with everything else that we were doing came up. But I think because we had such a great team, and I'm gonna brag on them a little bit. They're very, very awesome that we were able to bring it all together, and so those were basically the challenges that we dealt with.
All right, and I'm going to close up our presentation with just a couple of final reflections on this entire documentary making process. So as Liz mentioned earlier, none of us had really had experience making a documentary. So from beginning to end, that was a completely new process for us. So that was definitely something that we learned. And then hearing from Duke leaders really changed our outlook on medicine and for a lot of us, our personal career paths. They've inspired us in so many ways. We've learned some life lessons about healthcare costs, about team-based medicine, about research integrity, and about patient advocacy, all of which we're going to take with us throughout the rest of our careers. And it's really been a wonderful opportunity to learn about the past and how it's created the present, and learn about how the present can really influence the future. So in retrospect, this project has given us the opportunity to reflect on Duke as an institution, appreciate the hurdles that our past leaders have faced, take pride in who we are today, assess our current day challenges, help create a vision moving forward, and be optimistic for the future. Thank you.
All right, as Dr. Feagin is congratulating the team on a job very well done, we have time for a few questions. Does anyone have a question for the documentary team? You're going to let them off that easy?
No, I'm not going to let them off.
Oh, there you go.
As I was thinking over my gratitude for that and the history of Duke Medical School and the university as I know it, I realized that Duke has been here nearly 90 years, and that there's at least 3 of us in the room that occupied the first third of that. Jim Urbanek, Dr. Bradford, and myself that were in the first third. And then this is the latest third. And it was absolutely thrilling for me, for you all to capture those greats and remember the leadership that we enjoyed in that first third. And it's hard to tell you how much I appreciate what you accomplished without getting too much, but I thank you for the thumb drive of the presentation, which will last me a lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Feagin. Fantastic. And I'm just going to hand you the mic right here.
You said you weren't documentarians. I know you're physicians and want to be physicians. But were you also videographers, or did you pull somebody in to be part of your team?
So one of the big things about a project that you really don't have any background in is knowing who to bring in. And so after kind of a lot of hand wringing right at the beginning of the first few weeks, you're like, okay, what are the inherent talents that we have? Marginal. And then knowing what's the key crux that you need that you need to actually bring in, and that's someone who has video experience and actually putting together a video. And so Adam Barkley out of Duke Athletics was just an incredible help to all of us in terms of kind of guiding us and sort of showing us the right way and putting together a product that got stitched together in a meaningful way. So no, I think we recognized where we needed some help, and we're able to reach out, and because the greater Duke community is such a fantastic place and so willing to help us out, we were able to do that.
Other questions?
Thanks so much for sharing that. I'm curious, throughout all of the footage that you had and the time you spent making this, if there are any moments of leadership that you observed that really stood out to you.
That's a great question. We're going to have to think about this one a little bit. So, I mean, as you might imagine with the video of this link, there was an incredible amount of footage on the cutting room floor. And so I think one of the things that surprised all of us as we're watching this through the year, as we're collecting videos from these legends, not all across Duke, you're just amazed that the rich history that they bring and the remarkable things that they were a part of. So to say any one particular would kind of do a disservice to everybody, I think, from that standpoint. But what you saw, I think, is that there was a consistent theme. And I think Dr. Anlin said it very well. It's something that he hopes continues on, and that has been here throughout the 90 years that Dr. Feagin's talked about for Duke Medicine and the university community at large.
How about leadership lessons that you all learned going through this process?
Having a great team helps. I'm answering all the questions here, so that's all right. John, come on up.
Well, I think a couple are some of the things that have already been mentioned, one of which is distributive leadership, and I think that started right at the beginning, and Dr. Feagin mentions that with Dr. Davison realizing that he had to bring in quality people. He brought in the second and the third, and it went from there, and that's surrounding yourself. I think Alex Gorski yesterday mentioned that he has a company of 130,000, and so for him it's important to know who the next 10 are in the ranks below him, and then the 10 of those 10. Another thing that Dr. Snyderman mentioned was you can never listen or communicate often enough, and I think that was another big thing that we learned as a team throughout this process, and with those with whom we interacted in making the film.
On that note, please join me in congratulating the team one more time on a fantastic job.
And also, you will get a link to that video. So we will email a link to the video. And in the spirit of excellence at Duke, some more entertainment in terms of excellence over the years at Duke.
Becomes the first Division I men's coach to win 1,000 games.
Congratulations to the Duke Blue Devils, who win their third ACC tournament championship in a row, their 10th in the last 13 years.
Gardner, Patty Allen Thompson, and Dunleavy for 3 in a row. Oh, that is some sequence for Duke University.
There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it up. Yes!
spirit of excellence and leadership at Duke over years and years and years. Coach Mike Krzyzewski and Jay Billis.
Thank you. I'll follow you. Thanks.
After all this.
Wait, one thing. I need knee replacement surgery from clapping this morning. All you orthopedic people, it's just like Feagin catching skiers off the slopes on Vail. You guys are sneaky. Real sneaky.
It's the best way to get a standing ovation.
Yes.
Or to straighten your shorts when it flies. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Can you hear me through this thing? It's always an honor for me to come back to Duke, and especially to be with Coach K. And I think when you look at the recruiting success he's had over the years, sometimes you need to be reminded of your failures in order to continue to aspire to greatness and excellence. And so that's why I'm here, is to remind him of a recruiting failure that he had back at the beginning. But when listening to General Dahl earlier talk about shared leadership, and talking to Coach K yesterday, one of the things that popped up in my mind was when you first started here and when you first started in coaching, that shared leadership might not have been the model. And how was it? How was your view of leadership when you got here versus now? What's the evolution?
Well, there are a lot of changes and changes in Duke medicine, but you have to be open to change. Like I just want to remind Ken Dahl that the price of apples now in my office are $2. Price has gone up. Book price has gone down, but the apples have gone up. I think it's Jay. It's important to be adaptive. When you're around talented people, and the theme of these couple days has been collective education, engaging, empowering. Basically, that's what we've tried to do during I've been here 35 years now. I remember '83. Trying to forget it, but then he shows up. We weren't very good then, but we were in the process of being good. And as a young coach, I got great leadership from Tom Butters, my AD, but I was still kind of stuck in a way that you had to do it, and sharing was not part of it, or empowering wasn't part of it. It was you do it this way. And over the years, and I think I would have been different then if I knew what I knew now. And maybe we wouldn't have had this couple tough years. To begin. Although it makes us appreciate the wins more. I've learned that the people around you make you better. And, I think it's interesting in Jay's climb. When I coached Jay was a high school All-American out of California, very talented, but even as a high school kid, he was always into communication, into TV, and wanting to be a broadcaster. When he was here at Duke, he helped start our TV station here at Duke. In the summers, his internships would be with ABC Sports, and so although he was really good in one area, he also had a passion in another area. And then he was a professional ball player for a while, was a movie star, although they had to put a lot of makeup on and dress him in different ways. But then he came back and went to law school, and when he was in law school, he was coaching. He was part of 2 of our national championships and contributed greatly then. And then he had a career decision to make. What do you do? Because he would have been a great coach, but and he had a passion there, but he went and he had a passion in what he's unbelievable at is broadcasting and communication. And I'd like for you to share, because you have the Feagin Scholars, and at some time in your career, you were them. You were hot tickets. They're part of you that think you know more than them, and you do in some cases. and then you, I'm doing sides here, you all know more than them, but you don't know everything. And so as you climb that ladder, as you know, you climb the ladder in your profession to where now Jay is you guys. He's these big shots up here who are head of medicine and head of the hospital. And I'd love for you to go through a little bit of your journey so that it might be that it's not just a mentor, but who you're mentoring and how you felt in those situations.
Well, growing up where I did and being in the situation I was in, I was very privileged as a young person in the family I grew up in. I was not privileged in the basketball family I had. When I was in high school, we had a dysfunctional athletic department. And I wound up having 3 different coaches in the 4 years that I was there. But the one that I had the longest was the worst one. And Coach K, you probably remember this, it was a very difficult situation for me because it served as a barrier to learning how to be a functioning teammate and what a good teammate meant. And when I got here, I don't think I understood it until I was taught what it meant here. So, I didn't understand really because of the barriers that were put up by our coach. And my coach, not a bad person, but he was a bad coach. And what he wanted was for 8 different guys to average 9 points a game and to nobody get their name in the paper except him and the team. And it didn't work that way. That's not the way it was going to be. And so we turned into a bunch of sharks. And then I got here and I learned, no, that's not the way it works. And you can trust the people around you and you can trust your coach. And that was an eye-opener for me. I wasn't taught what a good teammate was, so I had to learn that. And I learned it here. Without that, I don't think I would have been set up to function properly as a lawyer, because I was a practicing trial attorney for 10, 11 years before I went full-time into broadcasting. So for my journey in deciding what I was going to do ultimately, it all stemmed from being a player here. That's how I learned, the we instead of the me, but not exclusive of me. That I think some people look at teamwork as being the we is everything and you're subservient to the we. The we ahead of the me, but not exclusive of me, because a great team is made up of great individuals. So that your individual talents are really important and they have to be honored, not just by the leadership, but by your teammates. And so when I was in school here, and I'm interested in what you think of this, because we had a unique group in that our class, Johnny Dawkins, Mark Allery, David Henderson, Weldon Williams, myself, we all came in together. It was a time when there wasn't a ton of talent in the program. So we basically had the same team for 4 years.
Right.
And we grew together as a team, but our roles didn't change. Basically the star players as freshmen were the star players as seniors. So a lot of times you go into a situation, you might be a role player, a quote unquote role player as a freshman or sophomore, and then butt into a more of a load carrier as a junior and senior. We were the same roles the whole time. And so when you're labeled as a role player, which I was really proud of that. I was a role player in a damn good team. That was a good thing. But other people outside of your organization hear role player and they hear limited.
Right. So
for me, I had to get over that other people see me as limited, and you can let that affect you. And I think I did. I think I did let it affect me at times. So I learned a lot through that. That if your leaders, your coach, and your coaching staff value your contributions, if your teammates understand that everybody has a role, if you're all striving to be a star in your role, but don't limit yourself to that role, you can be great. And that's the thing I took from here when I got into, I went into 2 shark-infested professions.
By the way, I'm sure you have an understanding of that. And,
I'm a lawyer and I'm in broadcasting. 2 me-first professions. And it took me a while as a lawyer when it's an eat-what-you-kill business to understand, like I worked for different lawyers. I was very fortunate the structure that we had at my law firm, that you could work for different people and learn different ways of doing things, different ways of approaching it. If I worked for one person, I would think that was the only way. And that would have been a detriment to my development in that business. When I got into broadcasting, you found out really quickly that there are a lot of people there that the me is in front of the we. And what I learned there was you had smaller teams that you could have an impact on. Like I can't have an impact on the culture at ESPN. It's too big of an organization for me to impact it from my position. What I could do was I could have an impact on my team in the games that I'm doing. And I'll give you an example. In a broadcast team that's doing a game, if I come here to do Duke, North Carolina, I'm the analyst, there's a play-by-play person, we may have a sideline reporter, but the people who are behind the scenes are the real stars. The producer is in charge, the producer's the head coach in charge of everything. The director is in charge of all of the pictures. So that's how the story of the game gets told. And I'll tell you one brief story about how I kind of learned that I can have an impact here. It was 1998. I had just gotten rolling in this business and decided, this is what I'm going to do. I was about to leave my law practice to go full-time into broadcasting. And I was assigned to the Duke Carolina game as a sideline reporter, which a job which I did not enjoy. But we had a production meeting. ESPN2 was rolling out with that game. So it was a network launching game. And we had a big production meeting. The producer, the head coach, is in charge of the content of the broadcast. The play-by-play person and the analyst didn't go to the meeting. I went. So the play-by-play person had told the producer, who happened to be Tim Corrigan, Gene Corrigan's son, had said, I think the focus of the open of the show and the way the show should go, the game, is Shammond Williams is going to be the headliner because of the way he shoots it. And so I went to the meeting. That was discussed as, here's what we're going to do. Here's what the analyst wants. And the producer asked me, Jay, what do you think? And I had a choice to make. Now, if the analyst and the play-by-play person had been there, I might not have spoken up. But I said, I differ with that. I think the most interesting thing about this game is Antoine Jameson. That he's able to be the most productive player without having the ball in his hands for very long. And the producer didn't really understand what I was saying and asked me for an example. I said, well, as an example, he could be in this game tonight and have 25 points and 15 rebounds and only have the ball in his hands for a minute and a half. And he said, how can we show that? And I said, well, do you have somebody that can we give somebody a stopwatch in the truck, and every time he catches it, hit the stopwatch, and every time he releases it, let go of it? And he goes, yeah, we can do that. And I said, just don't count if he's the inbound guy or if he's shooting a free throw. We don't count that. So they did that. At the start of the show, I came on, and the play-by-play guy and the analyst talked about Shammond Williams and made him seem like the biggest deal in the world. And then they went to me, and I gave that little spiel about why I thought Antoine Jameson was a big deal. They did the stopwatch the whole game. Jameson had a great game to the detriment of the big D.
But we were trying to help fulfill. I'm always trying to help him, for crying out loud. Even
at the end of the game, he had 35 points, 15 rebounds, and had the ball in his hands for 53 seconds. When that was broadcast, it was in every newspaper. Sports Illustrated uses it. And all of a sudden, the people at some of my bosses thought, you're not an idiot. We need to listen to you. And it's because I showed up. And because my boss, the producer, listened and asked the question and didn't just take and then, to the detriment, honestly, of the play-by-play and the analysts, they didn't show up. And maybe they had a good reason not to show up, but showing up is a big deal. And then, so I felt like I could have some impact on things, and I can help the producer do a better job, because I look at my job as how can I drive content. Mm-hmm. ESPN says the thing is serve the fan, like our mantra, serve the fan. I'm not going to differ with that publicly. Mine, as in my job, is serve the game. is I need to serve the game, because whatever serves the game will ultimately serve the fan, and I have an obligation to the game, and that's the way I've looked at it. The problem we've got is there's no training in my job. They throw you out there, and if you swim, you can keep swimming. If you sink, they say, God, it was nice knowing you.
Yeah, but do people, when you were going up, did some people help you swim, and now you're in a position, how do you help people swim in order to have a great broadcast?
I help, the way I do it is, the answer to your first question is, no, I didn't get a lot of help. Mm. There were very few people who reached out and said, here's how you do this. I learned it by reaching out to people who were behind the camera saying, can I come watch you work?
Great.
So I would go to games on a night I wasn't working. I actually went to one of your games. It was at Wake Forest. I drove to Winston-Salem, and I sat in the truck and watched the broadcast from the truck, because you could sit behind the broadcast, you can't hear them.
Right.
And so I sat in the truck, and it was like watching a NASA launch. I didn't realize all that was going on. Mm-hmm. And it made me better, it made me more aware of what I should do to be easy to work with, because of all that was going on. I mean, that's unbelievable in there. And I would tell all my colleagues, if you ever get a chance, do that, it'll make you better. But what I do with younger folks now, some of them aren't open to it. They don't want it. And I'm not going to force myself on, but I'm available. And I don't think I'm talking out of school here, but I talked with Grant Hill when he got the job with CBS. I made myself available to him. I said, anything you need, as much or as little as you want.
But he wants to be coached.
He was great.
Yeah.
And so I gave him every piece of paper I had, every bit of advice he may want, but also tried to be mindful of there could be too much information. Like just because somebody asks you doesn't mean you bombard them with every little thing. So I tried to be mindful of that too. But if you're maybe if I'm not, didn't feel secure in my position, I wouldn't. In a Shark Tank, you wouldn't reach out to some of the other sharks.
Right.
But I don't look at it that way anymore. I looked at it that way that I had to survive when I started, and you were careful. You learn pretty quick that you have to be careful of the information that you have, and the work that you do is really proprietary as a broadcaster. If I say something in a meeting, somebody's going to say it before I get a chance.
Yeah.
They do it all the time. And
they get your stuff.
Damn right.
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
And so you learn pretty quickly that you have to let the people know who need to know what your thought process is. But the people who are likely to take it on their own, they're gonna take it. So you find out who those people are pretty quickly, and you have to